Welcome to the Messy Podcast, where we talk all things teen and tween. My name is Lindsay and I am a youth mentor and workshop facilitator in Perth, Western Australia. Each week we speak to experts, parents and the odd teen when we can get them in. We talk about all of the messy things life brings when our teens are going through one of the most confusing, developmentally challenging and vulnerable stages of their lives. In this episode, we will be exploring highly sensitive types with Melissa Schwartz. Melissa is an expert in working with highly sensitive families, and in our conversation, we talk about the challenges parents and teens face when it comes to understanding each other, specifically if you or your teen are highly sensitive. Melissa offers some great advice and resources in starting to understand what a highly sensitive person is and how you can start living in a way that is more supportive and nurturing. We also go into how she helps bridge the gap between parent and teen communication and why it's so important to address those unrealistic expectations on both sides. So if you're looking to improve family dynamics and learn how to have those tough conversations, or even if you just want to learn more about highly sensitive people, then this episode is for you. So I've told the listeners a little bit about what you've done, but first of all, I want it to come from you. So what covers a highly sensitive family? What does it look like? Like, is there one or more of the family members that are neurodivergent, or does it have anything to do with like diagnosis at all? How does it all work? Because I assume a lot of people have communication problems and just don't realize that being sensitive is a thing.
It's a great question and broad, so I'll do my best to answer it. And you ask me if there's anything else that you want to kind of dive into or I can refine. So yes, when I say that I work with highly sensitive families, I mean parents and children that may or may not be more sensitive, more emotionally sensitive. So most of the time what I find is that there is at least one parent and one child that is highly sensitive in a family. This is because it's a trait, so it's not a diagnostic, but the trait is actually genetic. So especially when I'm working with a biological family, it's very likely that at least one of the parents is highly sensitive, if not both. Occasionally we'll skip a generation, and so I might hear from a parent that their parent was highly sensitive and that their child is, but just about every time it's parent and child that will share the trait. And I keep saying the word trait rather than disorder, because being highly sensitive is not a diagnosis. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's neurodivergent. Being highly sensitive is really, I like to think about it like a more extreme temperament type. So it really has to do with our hardwiring, the way that we are wired from birth. And what it really means is that we just have more sensitive nervous systems. So we take in more information through our sensory systems. We take in more information through our emotional system. We feel emotions on a I like to say a more saturated level. So if you think about, for example, a box of crayons, most people that aren't highly sensitive experience like the primary shades of emotions. So they experience happy and sad and angry and the more common emotions that we all experience as humans as things like red, yellow, and green. But highly sensitive people experience joyful and elated and despair and hopelessness. We experience these deeper ranges of emotions, more like magenta and cobalt and hot pink with sparkles. So the emotions that we feel are bigger, they're more intense. Based on the research, which was initially done by a psychologist named Elaine Aron in Northern California. She did her research starting in the late 80s, early 90s. She started publishing it in the mid 90s. She found that it's about 15 to 20% of the population that's highly sensitive. More modern research says it's more like maybe even 20 to 25% of the population, but it's pretty safe to say 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 4 are highly sensitive. The other thing that I find so interesting about her research is that it was conducted not only on humans, but on over 100 different species of animals, including deer, dogs, fruit flies. I don't know how behaviorists study fruit flies, but they do. And what they find is that the trait shows up with the same sort of qualities in the same ratio. So it really tells us that there is a benefit to the collective by having 1 in 4, 1 in 5 that are more sensitive, noticing more subtle details, deeper processors, tuned into the more refined aspects of life.
Yeah, right. I have so many questions now coming out of my brain. Um, so I guess I'll start with how. So is there a large number of families you work with that are misdiagnosed? So like
Yes.
misdiagnosed as ADHD, autistic, or and can you elaborate on that and how can you tell the differences?
Yes,
And
totally. So
yeah,
there are all sorts of diagnostics that people who are highly sensitive might be misdiagnosed with. In my experience, the more common misdiagnoses are things like ADD or ADHD, and that tends to let me say it this way: there are some behaviors or experiences that can look similar between people that are highly sensitive and people that are ADHD. Things like being easily distracted or being able to hyper focus when they're interested. But highly sensitive people tend to do that because they notice subtleties. And I have memories of being in school and the person next to me clicking their pen and me being totally distracted by the sound of the pen, not because I have ADHD, but because I am so tuned into what's going on around me. The buzzing of an overhead fluorescent light in a class could distract me. Somebody
yeah,
flipping their pages could distract me, but that's not necessarily ADHD, right?
yeah,
As a highly sensitive person, I also have an ability to stay really focused on things that matter to me because I'm a deep processor. So when I am engaged in an activity that I really love, I'm engaging in all aspects of it. And so time can kind of get away from you. So there are some qualities that are similar that show up, but they're not necessarily the same. Another diagnostic, especially for children and teens, that I see very often is oppositional defiance disorder.
yeah,
ODD is when what I see is when a child is highly sensitive and also strong willed, or what I might call high spirited, or a freedom seeker, a power seeker, which I'm all of those things. Um, when there is a child who really has this innate drive inside of them to have autonomy, to be in control of their own experience, and they have parents who don't get what that child needs, who might be a little strict in their guidelines, who might have a belief of this kid needs to listen to me, and so they kind of tamp down and get a little more strict. Those kids can again look like they have ODD because they tend to push back, they might start to lie and rebel. They have really big emotions, and so their anger and frustration will come out in slamming doors and saying very mean things, but it's not necessarily ODD. It could just be that this child is highly sensitive and wired in a way that looks like ODD. Is that clear and kind of
yeah,
landing
yeah.
so far?
Yeah, and that's kind of like where you come in working with families in this miscommunication or misunderstanding between the parent and the child, or even a child itself. Like if I was a teen listening to this and I was like, oh my god, yes, I do hear the fan clicking in the classroom, and I thought I had ADHD, and like ADHD is massively overdiagnosed. And so when you say that they might be an oversensitive child, what are some strategies that they could use start trying to understand themselves a bit more in this way instead of going down an ADHD route? And a teen has thinks they have ADHD, but they might be oversensitive. What can they do to help them understand themselves better?
Yeah, great question. A lot of times, parents reach out to me because their teens have seen something that I put on Instagram or Facebook. Ugh, I just had to get on TikTok because it seems like that's where people are hanging out these days. I was really reluctant to do that, but that's where people are learning about this stuff. And I
Yeah,
first want to say that there is unfortunately a lot of misinformation on the internet.
yeah,
There are people talking about all sorts of things coming from a perspective of good intentions and bad information. So I really like to stay really close to the research and also talk about experiences that I've had and my clients have had that help people put themselves into a new understanding about what might be going on for them. So if somebody is listening and they're thinking, okay, well, I might have ADHD, but I might just be highly sensitive. Like, what do I do about it? For me, the first step is going to Elaine Aron's website, she has some quizzes, and she's got one for adults. She's got one for children that parents can use to assess their children. I have one on my website that I created that sort of blends high sensitivity and sensory processing disorder, which is another diagnostic that we haven't talked about yet, where kids might be misdiagnosed, or there might kind of be an overlap of the two. So I would say start with one of these assessments that are really simple, like 30, 35 statement questionnaires where you sort of check off, does this resonate for me or not? And go through it and see how many of the statements ring true for you. If it's, I believe the way the assessments work, it's like if you check 11 or 13, it's a small number of them, maybe about a third of them, then you could consider yourself highly sensitive. Or if several of the statements are absolutely, especially bold, underline, italic, true about you, you can consider yourself to be highly sensitive. What I want to say, the wonderful thing about being highly sensitive is it sort of doesn't matter. It's not like you get accepted into a club or you
Yeah.
need a license, or if you're highly sensitive, now there's a certain protocol. It's really
Or
just a
you need
new
to
way.
change who you are. Yeah. You don't need to change who
Exactly.
you are or anything like that.
Not at all. Once you recognize that you're highly sensitive, for me in my own personal life, it was sort of like a balm, like this soothing lotion over my soul of like, oh, that's who I am. Because I personally grew up thinking there was something wrong with me. I was
Mm.
always sort of more reactive than other people. I was told I made too big of a deal about things. I was called dramatic, or an actress, or I just got these snippets from other people of sort of disapproval of who I was. And when I realized I was highly sensitive and there was nothing wrong with me, it's that I was wired in a way that was different than other people. It just felt so soothing. And I also realized that I tended to gravitate towards other highly sensitive people. Most of my friends are what I would call HSPs, highly sensitive people. And when I found Elaine Aron's book about, I don't know, it was about 15 years ago. I was already doing this work. I just didn't have the language for it. I was working with
Yeah.
people who were like me, but I didn't really know how to define it. I remember reading this book in a weekend and sending a photo of it to everyone that I knew, saying, "Oh, this is who we are. This is us." Because it just felt so validating to see myself through that lens. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, it sounds like that might be who I am, do a little bit of digging around online, take an assessment. It'll take you maybe 5-10 minutes. It won't take very long, and see if it lands for you. There are plenty of people who are both highly sensitive and have ADHD. It's absolutely possible to be highly sensitive and have borderline personality disorder. But it's also possible, if you're a teenager, and this has happened to me on multiple occasions, where kids have come to me, or their parents have reached out to me, that their child was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder, and they were going to therapy and it wasn't working. And once I started working with them and we kind of dug a little bit deeper about what was going on for them, many times they come with an anxiety disorder. What's actually at the root of those disorders is misunderstood high sensitivity that has morphed into something else. And if we can help somebody understand their highly sensitive nature, then those diagnostics tend to just sort of fall away.
And is that often inflated with the miscommunication with their parents as well?
I think so. I think, look, I can only really speak to my own experience with that
Yeah.
question, but I think that as a tween and teenager, especially in the world today with social media and internet access at a very young age, it is very easy to feel invalidated by our family. And when we feel invalidated, like that we are innately bad or wrong, like we are inherently inappropriate, that is going to twist our personality into a different direction. If you think about a tree, like a beautiful, strong, straight tree, I like to think about a temperament that has been nurtured, loved, understood, supported, growing into a personality that is just solid and stable, versus a
Mm.
temperament that is misunderstood, judged, um, angered with, yelled at, blamed, shamed, guilted. coerced into being different than who they are, it turns into like one of those knotty trees that's all twisted and bent. And it's not that there's anything innately wrong with who the person is, it's that they've been nurtured in a way that is antithetical to their real authentic well-being.
Yeah, definitely. You obviously come across all these challenges with parents, with families facing this problem in their household, which is affecting probably all aspects of their life, like their study, their friendships, their self-esteem. Like, what are some strategies or tips you can give parents in particular for starting off a better communication relationship with their teen?
Yeah. The first conversation I would encourage a parent to have is one that's very humbling, where they approach their child and say something like, I'd really like to share something that I learned recently with you. And it makes me want to apologize for some of the things I may have said and done over the years,
Yeah.
because I think I'm realizing that maybe I've been misunderstanding who you are.
Yeah,
It
and that
almost
can be
actually
incredibly powerful
incredibly
for
powerful.
the
It almost
teen.
brings tears to my own eyes because there are adults that I work with who need to hear that from their parents. And if a teen hears that from their parent, it can absolutely transform the entire household.
I have a question about parents who are quite maybe immature and find it incredibly difficult to do something like that. Have you worked with parents like that?
I have. And what
They
I
couldn't eat the
find,
humble pie.
yeah, exactly. What's so interesting is that a lot of my work, Lindsay, with parents is, it seems like it's about their children, but it ends up really being about
Yeah,
them and
it's
their
not.
own journey. And so
Hmm.
very often when a parent comes to me and they say to me, I'm not saying that to my kid, that's where my really exciting work with the parent begins, because then we get to dive into what happened for them in their childhood. And most of the time it's that their parents, their parents were, you listened and you followed and you obeyed and you didn't talk back and there was no room for emotions in this household. And so we get to heal their inner child, because in order for them to really be the parent they want to be to their now teen or child, their own inner child needs to have some healing. So there are all sorts of layers of beautiful unfolding that happen in this work.
So when you work with parents like that, and you obviously work with the teen as well, do you work with them separately, or is it always together?
I work with them in different constellations. So when I start working with a family, I like to take our first month of coaching and work with each person individually. So I always start with individual sessions because I want people to be able to be really transparent and not censor
Yeah,
their truth because there are other family members there. People don't want to hurt each other, of course. You come
yeah.
to this work, you love your family. So I like to start individually, and then we'll often work together. It could be mom and child, dad and child, mom and dad and child, multiple siblings. It really kind of depends on each individual family.
Yeah, and is there a common thread with what teens kind of find to be a problem with the communication breakdown?
What I'm hearing these days is that teens feel helicopter parented by their parents. They think their parents
Yeah.
are too overbearing. And when I kind of poke around at that and ask about what their friends are doing, they tend to realize that their parents are usually a little more middle of the road in terms of how overbearing they are. The other place where I hear a lot of common feedback from tweens and teens is around their parents being unfair and creating rules that don't make sense to the kids, things that like the parents don't get what's going on for their kids and why they want what they want. I hear a lot of it around dating, which, to people of my generation, we called it dating, but nowadays kids call it talking, right? I hear it around like Snapchat and social media. That's how kids communicate. Parents don't really get that that's what Snapchat is. They think that they can text, but that's not cool enough. So there are all of these places where I help parents and children have understanding and then also make agreements with each other so that kids can. Let me say it this way. What I often tell teens is that if they want more freedom and more privileges, it also comes with more responsibility. And in order for their parents to trust them, they have to be responsible. And so we do a lot of agreements where we make sort of contracts where we write out terms so that everybody understands going into a new experience what everybody is agreeing to, and we use logical consequences. That I teach that to parents instead of punishment, because nobody wants to be punished or shamed. Just this morning I was talking with a mom and I said to her, do you remember what it felt like to be in trouble as a kid? And I watched her whole face change, and she said, oh yeah, it meant I wasn't safe and they were coming for me, and I was shamed and guilty, and I had to hide things. I mean, most of us remember what that feeling of being in trouble feels
Mm.
like. I want to help raise a generation that doesn't have to be in trouble, that learn how to behave appropriately because they're taught what responsibility means, how to be responsible, how to be kind, how to be respectful to themselves, to their parents, their families, to their friends. You don't have to come down hard on your kids. You don't have to be a helicopter parent. You don't have to hide them from the world. There is a way to teach them how to be safe and kind and appropriate as they're navigating all of these new technologies and ways of doing things. So most teens these days just feel like their parents don't get it and they don't want to hear it. And so I often help kind of broker that understanding between them.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is that there's parents have put in boundaries or rules, and they haven't really explained the rules and why. Like the way we show love to our kids when, especially when they're teens, is to give them boundaries, to give them a safe environment to grow up, to feel seen, and to allow them to explore these aspects of themselves in a safe way. And I guess what you're saying is parents don't explain that correctly to their highly sensitive teen, and maybe they're highly sensitive as well, and that's when that environment gets tension.
Yeah. And maybe they're just slightly askew of what their child needs. So I often like to use a
Okay.
metaphor of a car when I'm talking about high sensitivity. And I think about the highly sensitive person sort of like a Porsche or a sports car, and the non highly sensitive person like a Prius or like a van, like an easygoing vehicle. There's nuance with a Porsche or a sports car. You put gasoline in both vehicles, but you put a certain kind of gasoline into your sports car. You change the oil in both vehicles, but you change it more frequently, and you use a higher quality oil in your sports car. So when we're talking about highly sensitive children, I'm often talking about small, specific shifts that make all the difference. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not, throwing everything out and starting fresh. It's looking at
Yeah.
what you have going on, and I look at it through a lens of, is this working for the child and is it working for the parent? I always start by what works for the parents, because we don't want to give the children freedom, permissions that the parents don't feel comfortable with. But then within that, we want to make sure that the child has enough freedom, enough opportunity to express themselves, to explore the world, and so those are where all of the little refinements come into play.
I want to touch on a little bit about external factors that are out of parents' control, such as, well, social media is a big one. What about things like bullying, school, stuff like that? Like, do you try and draw that out of the teen in your sessions? To maybe they haven't told their parents that they're being bullied, or their parents know they're being bullied, but they don't know to what extent. And like, it's a really big problem in Australia. We're second in the world for school bullying, first in English speaking countries. So it's a super big problem, and I'm really concerned about it in from a suicidal perspective. Like, it's just horrific. And when you throw in bullying and then being highly sensitive, I guess it's like, meltdown of emotions, and coping mechanisms maybe get thrown out the window, maybe.
Yeah, it is. I agree. It's hugely problematic, especially with like online bullying and mean
Yeah.
comments and things like that. So, a couple of different things. In my work with teens, I like to create a relationship where they feel safe telling me things, but I also want to teach their parents how to create that kind of relationship, because if their teen is only talking to me about it, that's indicative of this might feel like too big of a word, but a problem. I do believe that teens and parents need to have this open, honest, authentic communication to have a really happy, healthy relationship. So part of what I do is model for the parents how to have those conversations, give them
Yep.
cues for conversation openers, talk about when and where to have those kind of conversations with them. Um, the other thing that I really like to do with parents and kids, and I'll do this with them in a session together or individually, is talk about what could they say, what could the teens say when they're being bullied. So even in my own home, I have a stepdaughter who's 11, and her very good friend who's about 13, who lives just down the street, and we've had the experience of having dinner all together, and her friend talking to us about being bullied at school, and we would all go around the dinner table and say, so if this were to happen again, what could you say to them? And we all took turns, and some of what we came up with was wildly inappropriate, but it was moving the energy, moving the emotions,
Yeah.
and making us
And
laugh.
feeling,
And
yeah, and feeling a part of something bigger than just the bully and the child, like they were in
absolutely,
it with other people.
in it with other people. And then part of it was also us coming up with real language for her to put in her back pocket. So the next time
Yeah.
the same kind of bullying came up, she felt prepared and knew what to say to kind of shut it down and not take it so personally, not let it impact her in as big of a way. The other thing that I think is really important, especially for the sensitive ones, is talking with them about how to become energetically immune to bullying. Very often bullies and the people who are being bullied have this sort of like energetic match. There are a lot of articles online now about empaths and narcissists, and that's a very
Right. Yeah.
similar pairing also. An empath and a narcissist is sort of like a bully and the person being bullied, and energetically there's something that goes on there. And
Like
so I
magnetic.
like, yeah, exactly, it's magnetic. And so if you have a child who's being bullied, I would, number one, start wondering what's going on at home. What's their inner talk in their own self like? Where are they becoming magnetized to being bullied outside of that particular situation? And I would talk with them on more of like an emotional and energetic level, and see if we can find a way to help them sort of become immune to having that experience. Because strategies are great, their coping mechanisms are appropriate in certain times, but learning how to be a self-confident, assured, grounded teenager is worth its weight in gold. Many of the teens that I work with and have worked with over the years, there's one in particular who's graduating high school this week who I just ran into. I started working actually with her when she was about 8, when I was working with her parents. And then I worked with her again when she was about 14, 15. And now she's graduating high school. And I saw her recently and I said to her, you are so cool. I can't even believe that you want to hang out with me, because she's just this confident, gorgeous, creative, self assured, brilliant, funny young woman. And she is that way because we've done so much work over the years to make her that version of herself. It's inside of all of us. That
So what?
strong tree is there. We just need to nurture it into
Yeah.
being. Yeah.
So what was she like before you started
Mm.
working with her?
Totally emotional, hysterical,
Okay.
overreactive, freaking out all the time. She's one of 5, or I think now they have 6 kids. She was the problem child in the family, and she knew it. All the attention went to her, and none of it was positive. They were often having to leave places because of her. They couldn't go to places because of her. And mom and dad were just totally exacerbated by her behavior and didn't know what to do with her. And so they very often, parents come to me in total crisis where they're like, we don't know what to do with this kid. Our family is falling apart because of them. They're the problem, fix them. And it's
Yeah.
rarely that they're the problem and they need to be fixed. It's often that the family doesn't get them. And so they're
Yeah.
acting like a problem because they feel so unloved and misunderstood and out of place. And like the spotlight's always on them. And so it's working with them and working with the family and working with them and working with the family. And slowly but surely, it all shifts.
So I just want to say I find it super heartwarming and beautiful that families like, yes, they're in crisis, but they want to help their child, they want to help their teen, they want to make them harmonious in themselves as well as having a harmonious family. And imagine how elated and happy that girl's parents were to see their problematic tween turn into a confident, beautiful young adult. And I think that's obviously where your job satisfaction comes from.
There is nothing that's more heart filling for me than a family coming to me in crisis and despair and having them in not very long. I mean, most of the families I work with, it's like 3, maybe 6 months. Some families I've worked with longer, like maybe a year, have an absolute turnaround, a complete turnaround, like a miracle beyond anything that they could have imagined was possible for themselves and their family by just learning about who their child innately is.
Well, this has been a super interesting conversation, and I am hoping to possibly do another episode with you if I can get some listener questions. And is there anything else you would like to say about parents who may be struggling with their teens? Like, what was that website you said again, to do the test?
Yeah, so the website is on, it's Elaine Aaron's website. I believe it's hsperson.com. And you can also find the quizzes on my website, which is melissaschwartz.com.
Yep.
But I love answering people's questions. So if there are specific questions that people have and you want to have me back to address them, for me, that's where the really satisfying piece comes in, is getting into the nitty gritty, because we can talk general terms, but everybody's unique experience. And so, taking these general understandings into people's personal stuff is where I think other people also tend to really relate to it and they see themselves in what's going on. So, I love doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And where can people find you if they want to stay connected with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram at Melissa Schwartz, and my website is melissaschwartz.com. And you can find me there. You can find my email if you have any questions that you want to shoot to me directly.
Cool. And finally, I just want to ask if you have any reading material for parents, like one book that you think might, oh, yeah, that's definitely the book you need to read.
Yeah, for parents who are listening and have made it this far, I would strongly suggest reading Elaine Aaron's book called The Highly Sensitive Child, or
Okay.
she also wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Person. So if you think you might be highly sensitive, go for reading The Highly Sensitive Person. And if you have teens, I might suggest that too. The Highly Sensitive Child is really good if you've got younger children, and both of them are sharing pretty much the same information. It's just the way that it's being applied to different ages.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. This has been such an enlightening episode.
My
And
pleasure.